business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome back to another episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me today is our marketing maven, Lorraine Kessler. Lorraine, I don't know how many more titles we're going to be able to find for you.
I don't know. I don't.
Well, guess what? I have some brand news. We didn't cover any brand news the last couple episodes, so I thought maybe we would jump into something real quick. Hotels.com, you familiar with the brand?
Yes.
Well, they have a new mascot. Do you remember their old mascot?
No.
Captain Obvious.
Okay.
Okay.
Vaguely,
if I say so, right?
Vaguely, guy in a weird uniform.
Yeah.
Yeah, creepy.
Well, he was dropped a couple of years ago, so they've now come out with a new one, and it's a spokes bell called Bellboy.
Okay.
So it's a desktop bell.
All right. I think I've seen this. Yep.
Yeah, he's been featured on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, the hotels.com website, the app, I don't know, everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that Bellboy will act as your travel guide. Like, I need help with that, right?
Yeah.
By sharing deals and rewards and tools and blah, 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 right? So the introduction of Bellboy allows the brand, here's what they say, to better resonate with audiences across the world.
Okay. This is what they said. Okay.
Yes, this is what they say.
I love these marketing.
And guess what? He speaks every language in the world. I think. Yeah. How's that? Isn't that impressive?
Yeah, because, once you ring the bell, it's rung across the world.
And not only that, but he can tweak his personality. So you talk about multi-personality.
Oh, tweak his personality.
Yeah. Well, someone in a different country might need a different personality. Maybe here we need humor and, something more American, and over Europe it might be more reserved. I don't know.
This is the animated bell with legs, right? So
yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So anyhow, what are your thoughts on this well-established, getting rid of the well-established mascot of Captain Obvious? I don't know about if well-established or used frequently. Let's call it that.
Yeah, used frequently.
Getting rid of that mascot and introducing this Bellboy mascot a few years later.
Well, I'd say that Captain Obvious didn't obviously catch on that well, right? I mean, so I don't think it's any loss to get rid of him and hang up his crazy uniform, whatever he wore. I think the most, I do remember a spot where he was in a swimsuit and they took a view from him in a pool. I don't know what the point was, that the pool's filled. I don't know. It was really cringy. So, because first of all, it's not a guy you want to see in that kind of swimsuit. But
it'd be like seeing me in a swimsuit. We don't want to go there.
Part of his butt cheeks. It's like, yeah. Okay. So.
Oh no, we're not. We're gonna get. Oh man, we're gonna get canceled now. You said butt cheeks.
Oh, okay. What is that, like saying SA or?
Like no. That's okay. Keep going.
So I think the new mascot, I mean, it's invented. It's a little more creative. It's a little more unique. I hate these highfalutin statements that these marketing people feel obliged to put out about why they're doing what they're doing. We know that when you're doing a service, you need tangibility. You lack that. It's a challenge. So whether we like it or not, whether this, what do you call it, the bellboy, is the answer, is irrelevant, whether we like it. It's really how well does it do in creating sales and signups and bookings through hotels.com.
Yep.
I'm a little concerned about the media they're using because we talked a little bit in the last episode about short-term activation marketing, which is designed to get signups, to get sales, to immediate actions versus really affecting long-term brand value. And there seems to be using very transactional activation media. So, I maybe this is just how they're starting, but I feel like they need to balance the use of this character with this activation, because it's all a lot of promotional stuff, right?
Yeah.
As you said, rewards and promotions. I think they need to balance the use of this mascot with more long-term brand building
Hmm.
commercials, and be on media that isn't designed for just transactional immediate reaction, but use the medias, and it can be both digital and traditional, that's more brand building.
Yeah. Well, we see that with the way the duck was introduced, the Aflac duck.
Yeah,
Um, think of it just insurance. You have Flo's been around forever. The Geico's been around forever, or the Gecko for Geico. They've been around forever, but there's always a personality development to it.
right.
This kind of seemed to come on and it's being used. I don't know about I don't know. They're, it's about properly developing the personality. And Captain Obvious is a good example where he was just introduced and we weren't given insight into how that connected to the brand and the story of that character, etc. So I think maybe that's why they failed. They might be going down that same path again, don't you think?
Well, I think the path is a little different in that they seem to be focused on this gimmick
Yeah.
of this little icon. It seems gimmicky now, which, as I said, is a little more engaging, a little more creative, but relegated only to promotions and rewards.
Mm.
What is Hotel.com's position
Right.
versus Booking.com versus all these others?
Expedia or anything. Yeah.
Expedia, well, they're owned by Expedia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is their position? What is it that they offer other than deals? And
Mhm.
they're all doing that.
Yep.
So I think it's, you can't decommoditize your brand just by having an icon. You have to have some point to what makes your brand unique as
Mhm.
expressed. And Aflac, when you remember, they came out and their first commercials were not promotional. They weren't short term. It was all about, we created the first supplemental insurance.
Yep. They had to
And here's
explain the
why you
product.
need this. And here's why it's called, and this is the name, because it was a bunch of acronyms. And the duck helped with the name and was a curious and a creative way of getting the name seated in your mind as supplemental insurance.
Yep.
I know what they did. They were the first. They own that category. They did a great job. I don't know what Hotels.com owns uniquely.
Right. Yeah. They're just
Yeah,
another option out there among a sea of options.
right.
So good. Well, this leads actually into our topic,
Hmm.
which is effectiveness versus efficiency. And that Andrew Tindall guy that we referenced last week with the quotes, who wrote that article,
Yeah.
he actually had a 15-minute presentation at the Mad Fest in
Mhm.
2024. And the whole topic was around effectiveness versus efficiency.
Mhm.
So we're going to jump in on that discussion to kind of go over what he said and just give, our pro positionist perspective on it.
Yeah.
So let's get into that a little bit. The first thing is, let's define what he calls effectiveness. He says it's incremental brand growth, okay, versus efficiency is optimizing the crap out of something.
Okay.
That's what he uses as effectiveness and efficiency. I'm not quite sure how that plays out in our uses of the words, but let's go with what he's talking about. He uses the tortoise and the hare analogy, right? We
Mhm.
all know about that.
Yeah.
So the tortoise, of course, winning the race because he stuck to it. The hare with all these flashes of go, rest, etc. So with that typical analogy, you always take long-term brand building. It takes time. It produces effective results. It's like the hare, right? Or I mean the tortoise. And then the hare is trying to get results through these flash in the pan kind of promotions. So comment a little bit on your take on these words and his definition of them from a positionist standpoint.
Well, talk about Captain Obvious. I think Tindall. I mean, effectiveness. He says, I think too, in this thing which you sent to me, effectiveness needs to come before efficiency.
Mhm.
Duh. Right? And
Yep.
focus on work that works. Duh. So
Is that a technical term?
yeah,
Do we need to
duh. I
define
mean,
that?
it goes back to the quote from our other shit served fast is still shit, right?
Yeah.
So if it's more efficient, okay, but it's still shit. If it doesn't achieve the goal, and effectiveness is always the goal, right?
Mhm.
You always want, now you don't want to be so slow that you're no longer effective, which can happen if you miss a moment, because marketing is about moments too. It's about timing. So effectiveness is always the goal. And getting there with less waste, John Wanamaker, more efficiently, is always a benefit. I mean,
Yeah.
it's better than being inefficient, right? But there's no substitute for being effective. So to me, these are two different things
Mhm.
that he talks about. And kind of like goes back to this idea we were talking about where we've confused outputs, which he calls them, with inputs. We've become output obsessive to a fault. And I think this is fueled by what Mark Ritson calls tech porn. We're dazzled by those little activity measures, the KPIs, which are indicators of activity instead of achievement of the end goal. And I'll relate this medically, right? If you just took my KPIs, low cholesterol, low blood pressure, exercise, eat pretty healthy, and I have a heart attack, how the heck did that happen? Right?
And you're Italian.
Yeah.
Italians don't have heart attacks.
I mean, all right, I'm overweight, great, working on that, but like I have no genetic history for this.
Right.
So KPIs can be deceiving, and whether they're more efficient, yeah, you always want to improve. You want to be more efficient. Why would you not want to be more efficient? But don't confuse the two. Effectiveness is the king. That's what you want. And I think that in the book that you and I talk about, the long and the short of it, which is the best data we have so far from IPA Data Bank, it really proves for the first time for anyone who's interested in marketing that brand building trumps activation in terms of long-term effectiveness, growth, profitability, market share, sustainability, and that brand building actually helps short-term activation, but the reverse is not true. You can
Right.
run a slew of sales-oriented campaigns and they're not going to produce, and you can measure them and feel like you're being very efficient with the media you're using, but they won't add up to the effective brand build that long term makes companies successful. So,
Yep. Well, I want to help our listeners on something because we kind of went to using the terms inputs and outputs,
yeah,
right? Or outcomes. And Tyndall touches on that. And he says, in order to be effective, you need to focus on the inputs. But let's go back and define that. If I hear that as an advertiser and you say, focus on the inputs, I'm like, what does that mean? Give us some inputs that you value very highly for marketers, those who are listening, to say, okay, you told me to focus on the inputs. What are those? Help me out with that.
So, yeah, I think that's a great question. And to clarify for our audience, Mark, what is the difference between outputs and inputs from Tyndall's perspective? And I think what he's talking about is what we input in the mind of the customer. What do we plant in their brain or mind about our brand? How it's different, the values that it stands for, the emotional takeaways that we have, the gut impressions that we create about that brand that become normative, and that basically are held collectively by a large audience who have experienced that brand. and that these are more valuable than these, I would call these kind of transactional outputs that we seem to be obsessed with. They're like little breadcrumbs, and we hope they lead up over time to really building a strong brand uh, value or image, but they don't necessarily. So I think that's what he's talking
Yeah. Yeah, I think as we go through the process with clients, what has always been a revelation to them
about. Mm-hmm.
is that we are going back to the very nugget of the idea or the seed that we want to plant into the gray matter,
Yeah.
right? And they've always been out here. They're before we even really get into the depth of the appreciative discovery, so many are already trying to write taglines and headlines and all this other stuff, and we don't even know, well, what's the idea?
Yeah.
Like, we were asked at one point to do a creative evaluation, but we had no idea what the position was. Well, how do you evaluate a creative idea if you don't know the position? And they, after we talked them through that, they're like, well, no one ever told us this before. But that's the input. Like, let's say your tagline's already written,
Yeah.
and you are going between, let's say, reliability on one end, or let's go with agility.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are different enough, right? Agility says one thing, reliability says another.
Right.
You throw a tagline in front of me, reliability is a personality that I think is just over and over, it's very, very consistent. Whereas agility, if that's what your brand meaning is, that means you're jumping in based on circumstance and adapting.
You're nimble.
You're nimble, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't get the sense that a tagline could be written that would work for both of those.
Right.
Okay. So if I'm jumping to the creative, or I'm jumping
Unless you
to,
say reliable agility, which is insane.
hey, don't mess with our listeners'
That's
minds. We're
insane.
trying to
I'm
get this
telling you.
concept out, right? So you can't even evaluate creative when you don't know the idea.
What are you trying to get across? What
Right.
other
So
than a
here's
bunch
my
of words?
input
Mhm.
that I've passed, and I'm already trying to develop a creative output out of an input that I don't even know about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess it's the fundamentals of good positioning and good marketing.
Right.
You got to go back to the greats because they all got it. I mean,
Yeah.
it was second nature to them.
Yeah.
They would never jump to, should we be doing Facebook? Well, you didn't even ask all the right questions first and get the right answers before should we be using Facebook?
Right.
Should we be using a billboard? Well, if I were Aflac, I certainly wouldn't wanted a billboard when I was introducing the duck, because the billboard can't share personality.
And it can't pronounce the name.
Right. It can't tell
It
me.
can't seat the name in the mind with the quack, Aflac.
Yeah.
It needed sound. It needed
Yeah.
what needed to happen and what was the position needed sound to seat the brain.
Yep. And so I think what Tindall's getting at,
Mhm.
just to answer the input-output question, is if I had to define efficiency, I would define it as taking a shortcut. It's not really efficiency in the best use of the word.
Yeah.
So what these brands are trying to do is shortcut the process, and they think they can do it, when in fact they're failing at it and they don't even realize it.
Right.
And they're not taking that time to get the fundamentals down.
Well, maybe related to this is in the video that you mentioned, effectiveness in an age of efficiency at Mad
Yep.
Fest. If people skip to near a little bit beyond 8 minutes, he presents data that I thought was very interesting that shows that creative that won awards only work half the time in producing demand and brand results.
Okay.
So we're back to John Wanamaker.
Right.
So it wins awards. Now, this isn't about efficiency, but this is about, again, ad CMOs and ad agencies over-grandizing what they do as the be-all rather than achieving results for their patrons or advertisers, right?
Yep.
And it shows that if you're aimed at getting awards, that could be not very good for the advertiser.
Right.
I think that's, and I know it's a little bit different, but I think he's just pointing at what's effectiveness mean. And it does mean ultimately results for advertisers, not results for the ad agency, not results for the CMO, results for the advertiser.
Yeah. Well, and let's define efficiency then, as far as the way we look at it. We say this all the time, that if 100% of your messaging is focused on one idea, that's the ultimate efficiency. You can't get more efficient than that, because everything you do adds up to that one thing versus everything you do hitting 100 things or 1,000 things,
Right.
and they never add up.
Right.
So to me, that's the definition of efficiency. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. In terms of the message, yes, that's
Yeah.
right. You're talking about the message. Yeah. You have to be strategically concise in your message.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't bore and drone on, and people don't remember a list in their mind. This is what salesmen do. Salesmen go in, and this is the difference between marketing and sales. Salesmen go in and they figure out what floats your boat on a totem pole of kind of messages, and they play to the message they think is going to work for you. And they can do that because they have they're afforded the time in front of you and whatever. But marketing can't do that. Marketing doesn't, it has precious little time to get its message across to you. You're not paying attention. You're time constrained. You have too many messages. There's too much going on, too much clutter. So marketing has to choose and prioritize, which is the hardest human thing to do, prioritize. What is the high idea, the most important idea? How do I start with that and then drill down? And so it has to be efficient from a message. And I even think that media can be efficient too, in terms of what you use for what purpose. There are certain media that's more efficient in short-term transactional results, right? We know that. You said we have data, we can see that that's working. But there's certain media that's more effective for brand building. And it may not be as efficient, and it's not measured in the same way. It's a different beast, but you really need to have that in order to have the short term work even better. So you really need, it's not an either or argument. And I always hate when we get pushed into these either or situations, like get rid of efficient campaigns that drive immediate sales. No. Get rid of brand marketing because I can't measure it the way I can measure my short term. No, you need both. You need a balance. And you need a balance for very good reasons that are proved in this study, this IPA data study. One, that brand building drives the strongest long-term profitability, short-term does not. Two, that short-term activation campaigns do produce immediate sales, right? And sometimes you need that to keep the lights on, like depending on your business. But overuse can increase the customer's sensitivity to price, which hurts profitability. So you have to be balanced with this stuff. And recruiting new customers while maintaining price integrity is much more effectively done through long-term brand building than these promotions. So it's really bothism, is what Mark Ritson coined that phrase. And I think you talked about at the beginning. And it does go back to what Roy Williams, our Wizard of Ads, talked about, is the broader the reach, the broader, I'm going to talk media now. In the message, you should be narrow, strategically concise. You need to focus, right? But in media, the broader the reach, the broader the effects on existing customers and new customers. So there's more money wasted in advertising by underspending than overspending. And that was said by Morris Height. I think that's really true. And so I would like to advise from a media message standpoint, stay narrow and focused and strategic. Media standpoint, hey, go for the broadest reach you can afford. Like, use everything you can if you have the resources.
Yeah, and efficiency, I think the reason people like that word is because they automatically associate it with cost savings
Yeah,
or time savings, right? So time savings wise, I get the biggest outcome soonest.
yeah,
And we touched on that.
yeah.
On the budget side, they look at it and say I can spend the least, but I'd like to reorient what efficient media purchase is based on efficiency. To me, is it's spending the right amount on the right media.
Well, that's awesome.
You know,
Yeah.
we have
Yeah,
people that have $10 and they want to go out and try 20 media.
yeah,
So they try this and they try that and they try that instead of let's take your entire small budget because it's not sufficient enough for 20 media, and let's try one medium in sufficient amount that it's going to get the job done.
right.
Because with that same amount, if I try 20 media, I'm not going to know which one is right because I
Well,
didn't do enough of any of
yeah,
it.
resources dictate strategy, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
if resources are ample, go for the broadest reach you can afford. But that even works if you have a small budget. I'm going for the broadest reach for this message that I can with this dollar. So very often that says you have to choose the best media you can possibly choose in that situation.
Right.
One
And
can't be
yeah,
everything.
and I think Tyndall's he's right about, because we always say it all the time. He has to be right because we say it.
Yeah, yeah,
Brand building is necessary. That's effectiveness.
yeah,
But in a bothism sense, efficiency is great because who doesn't want to be efficient?
right.
What we're not allowing for is that muddy middle ground where we have to learn.
Yeah.
The idea is that effectiveness and efficiency should both be going up at the same time.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Very well said.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Very well said.
If
Mhm.
one's doing this while the other's doing this, chances are that one will eventually follow.
Yeah.
So it has to be a parallel thing that's happening.
And
And we don't,
they're related, but they're two separate things.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't give up on one in essence for the other. It's like you said, it's bothism.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess my commentary, you can't get all this across in 15 minutes, which is
No.
basically
He
what he's trying
races
to do.
through this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. His
And-
slides were very confusing too. So anybody who watches that, like way too much information on the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like trying to explain E equals MC squared in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, literally it is.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? We're talking about the human mind.
Yeah.
And I guess this is what drives me nuts about the discussion around AI and stuff like that, is we are underselling the complexity of the human mind every time we say AI can replace
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah.
The creativity aspect of a human mind alone is not explainable. Like, scientists have tried for gazillions of decades now to figure out the way the mind works. And they can figure out how data's passed and all that other stuff. But this overlay of what we have in terms of a soul combined with the physicality, let me say it that way, of who we are, there's just no explanation for it. You
Yeah.
can't explain it scientifically. And yet we're trying to scientifically always say, oh, this formula works to figure out how your advertising needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
If there were formulas, we'd all be using it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yep. So effectiveness and efficiency to me there's a lot behind that. But I think innately, you always like to use the term if we're in bed with our clients.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Meaning if we're really, really working together in parallel, we know what this looks like. We know if we're being more effective. We know if we're being more efficient.
Right.
So at the end of the day, I think the answer to this is you will know what it looks like when you see it,
Yep.
and you will know when it's not what you should be seeing.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there.
Yeah.
So you used a word that made me think of a Bill Bernbach quote, which I love, and we did quotes in a previous episode, but this is a good one. And he said that rules are what the artist breaks. The memorable never emerged from a formula, right? So the memorable requires creativity.
Okay. Well, Lorraine, I think we covered the 2 E words.
Yeah.
Maybe ours is E squared equals brand squared. I don't know. We'll have to make up a formula, sell it,
Yeah.
and then everyone will be able to figure out their marketing, right?
Be effective efficiently.
Yeah, there you go. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap up today's episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. Thank you to our listeners for joining us again this week. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, have an amazing day.
For Monday.
Ain't nobody's business but my own. You say you are.